Oh, hello there. Good to see you. Today, we'll be talking about Chapter 9 and the triumph and collapse of Jeffersonian republicanism between 1800 and 1824. Some of the things that we'll be hitting today are Jefferson's presidency, Madison and the coming of war, the War of 1812, the era of good feelings, the breakdown of unity, and then we'll finally be delivering you a delicious conclusion. Thank you.
After America settled in as a nation, there were two things they really wanted to accomplish. First of all, they wanted to expand physically, and we can see this through the Louisiana Purchase, where America doubled in size. Second of all, we can see it through the War of 1812, which was a failed attempt to gain Canada, but they made expanding westward easier, as now Indians did not have allies, such as Britain, to help them. Second of all, they want to increase the power of the central government. We can see this through the Second Bank of the United States, where now the central government can increase interest rate, decrease interest rate, or control the currency. The Supreme Court had their own grab of power after the case of Marbury versus Madison, where now the Supreme Court can rule anything they want unconstitutional. The executive branch also gained power. As we can see, Thomas Jefferson was able to purchase Louisiana because it wasn't against the Constitution. But this means that the executive branch can now do whatever they want as long as it's not against the Constitution. And what the Constitution says is very limited. So this gives the executive branch a lot of power.
Alright, so right now we're going to be talking about Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, who was elected in 1800. One of the things that Thomas Jefferson strongly believed in was that everyone deserved the chance to become economically prosperous in America. He also believed in the expansion of territory in the United States, which he showed in the Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson was also known for being a fairly peaceful man, and it was obvious in his term with the Embargo Act and not fighting with the French for the rights of Florida. So one of the things I mentioned earlier, the Louisiana Purchase, took place in 1803, when Napoleon, the French ruler, decided that France didn't have any need for the land in America and decided to sell it. The final price for Louisiana was $50 million, which ended up coming out to be about 4 cents per acre. However, it was difficult for this to be finalized, as some officials in Jefferson's cabinet considered this to be unconstitutional, as the Constitution didn't specify the authority of the president to expand territory in America by himself. Nonetheless, Jefferson bought it anyways, and as a result, farmers could now have more land for their farms and have more opportunity to become a prosperous citizen of the United States. And also another thing that I hit on earlier was the Embargo Act of 1807. This was in response to Britain and France's conflict, as Jefferson didn't want to pick sides or start a war with either one. So what he decided to do was pass the Embargo Act to prevent America from trading with any nation until Britain or France made up. This act did not work and was fairly weak and was dropped and replaced by the Non-Intercourse Act that, again, didn't let America trade with Britain or France until they made up. However, this time they can now trade with outside nations besides France and Britain.
Well, we should start by talking about why the war had to happen. The people who were for the war were called war hawks, and some of the main war hawks were Henry Clay and John Calhoun. So during this time, France and England was at war, and a lot of American merchant ships that went to Europe to trade were being attacked by French and British ships, and this really angered the Americans. So the first reason was to protect free trade and stop impressment. Second reason was to stop Native American attacks. So to the west, American and the Indians were still in conflict. And one of the leaders, Tecumseh, united a lot of Indians to fight against the Americans. Well, during the Battle of Tippecanoe, the Americans won and drove the Indians away with high casualty. But they found British guns. This meant that British were supporting the Indians the whole time, and this really angered the Warhawks again. Third reason was that they simply just wanted to take Canada. The War of 1812 was a war fought between America and Britain. This war occurred during the Napoleonic War and started from American merchants being attacked by both French and British troops. This war divided the nation as Federalists were against the war while Republicans were for the war. Some Federalists went as far as to preach that people who were for the war were unchristian. Madison's plan for the war was to take Canada, as it would hurt Britain's economy. The plan to take Canada was to simply walk in and take it, as American troops outnumbered Canadians 9-1, and 2/3 of Canadians were born in America. The War of 1812 was mainly fought on land, as the British set a blockade on America, and on August 1814, Britain burned down Washington, D.C. It was during this war that Francis Scott Key wrote our national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. In the South, future President Andrew Jackson took command and became a war hero after winning the Battle of New Orleans, which stopped Britain from controlling the Mississippi River. The Battle of New Orleans was fought after the Treaty of Ghent, which was signed December 24. This treaty was signed because Britain has already defeated Napoleon and had no reason to fight America. This treaty pretty much stated that both nations had to return all territory and keep pre-war boundaries. So what effect did this war have on America? First of all nations now respected America, as they were able to hold off Britain twice. America also saw Canada as a neighbor, and did not try to mess with it anymore. War heroes were created, such as Andrew Jackson, who later became the President of the United States, and many new factories and industries were created, as during the British blockade, America could not access European goods and had to create it themselves. One of the key things that happened after the war was the end of the Federalist Party. The War of 1812 made the Republican Party the most powerful party in the United States.
After the War of 1812, the United States entered a time of harmony and unity, most commonly known as the Era of Good Feelings. This was a time of economic nationalism and judicial nationalism in our country. The Era of Good Feelings came upon the presidency of James Monroe of Virginia. Monroe was voted president after James Madison, and quickly Monroe wanted to set up a plan to establish economic nationalism in our country. Monroe's first action in business was to create a new national bank, one that wouldn't cause lack of financial stability or an insufficient amount of gold or silver. This bank was called the Second National Bank of the United States, which was the largest. And they believed that there was no other way to fund another war without creating this new national bank. The other component of the Era of Good Feelings was the strive to have judicial nationalism. This task was set on the shoulders of John Marshall, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The court system was now being upheld to Marshall to make decisions which would strengthen the central government. Under his leadership, the court became as powerful as government force as Congress and as the President. The final aspect in the Era of Good Feelings was the problem faced with foreign affairs. After the War of 1812, the Americans wanted more trading options in the British Empire, as well as more power to deal with the Spanish disintegrating into the Americas. In Monroe's address to Congress in 1823, he articulated the United States policy on the new political order developing in the Americas with Europe. This would be known as the Monroe Doctrine, one of the most famous diplomatic statements in early American history. However, the Era of Good Feeling seemed to have come to a halt when there began to have a breakdown of unity. The American economy seemed to fall once again when the price of cotton fell in England, damaging America's most important export. This would later be called the Panic of 1819. Not only was there an economic downfall, but socially the issue involving slave states and non-slave states increased. There soon reached a breaking point when Missouri requested admission to the Union as a slave state, which would threaten the balance of free and slave states. Congress implemented a solution to put Missouri as a slave state, only with the option of putting Maine into as a free state. This in all prohibited slavery in the Louisiana Territory north of the 3630 parallel, except within the boundaries of Missouri.
So essentially, the main point of this video is that, first of all, Thomas Jefferson actually created a more powerful national government, even though he was against a strong national government. Second of all, the War of 1812 was unnecessary, and neither side won. No one gained anything, no one lost anything, it was unnecessary. The only group that lost were the Indians. Third of all, the Republicans came out of this war more powerful than ever, with the feel of nationalism all going towards the Republican side because they were for the war. The Federalists lost all their power and disappeared because the whole time during the war they were complaining and they didn't want to fight. This heat of nationalism quickly disappeared during the Panic of 1819 and later on during the dispute between the slave states and the non-slave states over Missouri. And this dispute and division will last until the Civil War.